The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Mark Lewis Schneider. I'm 74 years old, and today I'm going to be talking about how I discovered or realized the morality of God. I guess my spiritual trip began after graduating from college, and I started, now that I'm free and I could do whatever I wanted to do, it occurred to me that things appealed to me. Certain spirituality appealed to me. Not Judaism didn't appeal to me because I had been bar mitzvahed, went through that whole round. It was all very regimented. It didn't seem to offer any mystery to it, anything that you could discover on your own. So I embarked on seeking out gurus and going on a trip to India. So the spiritual path started through events like that, through different gurus, and then into Buddhism. And so I was exploring, what is this other world, the world that they had to offer. So after years of this exploration, I sort of reached a point where there was nothing more to discover. And then so here we are, years and years later, after exploring all of these other avenues, years and years later, connected with a Medicare agent to get my Medicare program set up. And then we started talking about Judaism, and she said she was a member of Valley Beth Shalom. And I said, oh, that's nice. And then she said, oh, you should come to our Torah study. I said, what? What Torah study? And you might, come see what it's like, and you might like it. And I said, I don't think so. I've been through metaphysics and all that. I've been through this route. There's nothing more really for me in searching out the answers. And she said, no, come, just come and you'll see. So I came to the Torah study. And in the Torah study, we were reading from the Torah, and I don't remember which parsha it was some parsha. And I was reading and I was saying, wait a second, there's something familiar about this. And I started to relate from my own experiences in my searches. I could now understand the journeys and the narration and the storylines and what these people were seeking. And it was like I was able to interpret it from my experience, and it all became very meaningful for the first time. And I had to find out more because I was realizing that there was something in the Torah. And now I'm coming back, and teshuva, they call it a person who returns after all these years, and you come back into Judaism. And I found myself being attracted to studying the Torah.
I thoroughly enjoyed the process. As a retiree, I say I don't want to do it unless it's going to be fun. And this was really fun from the very beginning to the very end. I loved being with the kids today and pulling out of them some of their stories, giving them some good questions and getting some good responses, and encouraging them in the spirit of this entire process to go home and ask questions to their parents and grandparents so that they will know their parents' story and their grandparents' story. Because if they don't ask those questions, they may never know those stories. And I think that that's a very valuable process in the tradition of the Door Vador. And I compliment all of you for developing this program, which I think is really terrific.
First I want to say Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. When I spoke to the kids, I wanted to emphasize the importance of being able to ask your parents and your grandparents things, because my parents lived till they were 81 and 85. I just didn't ask those questions. I sort of found them out after the fact. And with all the time kids spend on screens, I think we have a lot more value added by just doing one-on-one conversations with them. And secondly, I noticed that what I think was the logo was a man, and like it looked like a father and a son, rather than a mother and a daughter. And being that I was talking to the kids about the opportunity that I didn't have when I was 5, that they have now to be able to study and become a B'nai Mitzvah, a Bat Mitzvah. And so I would want to consider an alternative logos. We can have 2 logos, one flashes, or some way in which women are included.
I thought this was a wonderful experience both for me. My video wasn't shown, but doing it was very special. And something that I expressed to one of the girls I was talking to is the ability that I had gone back to where each of my parents were born in the early 1900s, one in what is now Belarus and one in near Lublin in Poland, and showed my kids where they were born. I also took my kids to where I was born. I was born in the U.S. So I think taking them back to areas that they're not aware of gives them an additional tie to what the previous generation was like. And I found it very interesting to be with the children and interact with them. I thought that was a special, and I think storytelling is a way to remember something without having to take notes or things like that. It leaves an impression and it's there forever. Like I always remember Helene's story. I never knew that, I just learned it today. But that will stay with me for the rest of my life.
So I really enjoyed telling my story. I really enjoyed the entire process, and thank you. One of the girls in the group today asked me how I could remember the details of what happened, because I said, it happened a lot of years ago. And the interesting thing is that it's really fun to remember. And sometimes I don't remember names, but I really remember how I felt about things. That's always been one of those things that I can do. I can remember my emotions at a particular time. And to be able to think back of all those things that happened was really fun and very valuable.
This was an idea that I thought was exciting, and I really wanted to pursue it and gathered the crowd around to see if they were willing to tell their stories. And it was a fascinating thing to talk to our chavara and say, who would be interested in this? And I told some detail of it, and many of the people said, I don't have anything special to say. And at least a few of them jumped for it and got excited by it. But for me, in thinking of generations, I think of my grandfather, who I don't think ever told us a story. And what I know through my mother. My mother told stories, and we got stories of the whole family through her. And fortunately, she did. But thereafter, I am not a great storyteller, but I really need to pursue it because I think it is a valuable way to communicate and to get to know yourself and the other people around you.
I thoroughly enjoyed the process, and I thank you for doing this. I was especially impressed with the children and some of the artwork. One little girl captured my mother, my sister, and I in a very miniature drawing on her painting. She captured when I talked about how much my mother took care of us, and she really was very sensitive to that. Her name is Madeline. I would like to meet her. And all the children were so interested and asked such good questions. And it was such a pleasure. I also tried to encourage them to talk to their parents and ask them who their grandparents were. And the reason I'm doing this, as I mentioned to someone, I will never turn down a request to talk about my experience, because many of us Holocaust survivors, it was sort of a dying breed, and we need to keep the story going. So I always am happy to share it. But I was so impressed with the children and their questions.
I too thought it was a wonderful process, even though it was a 2-hour setup time, and you guys were trying to gently tell, well, you don't have to come at 9:30. And I said, no, I'll come on time. And so we didn't start until noon or so, but that was okay. Sometimes you wonder, are you really getting your message across to the people you'd like to get it across to, the younger generation? And sometimes you feel terribly frustrated that it's, you're just not finding the right words. And so I just hope the messages that we're trying to convey reach ears that are open to hear them, because I think there are some very important messages that people had. I will say one thing which really brought me to tears, because I was talking to my granddaughter on Thanksgiving, and at the end of a half-hour conversation, she just happened to mention to me, some friends of mine and I were talking about what are our spirit animals? And she said, well, you know what I said? I said, my grandpa. And I have to I really burst out crying. But at least I had that confirmation. Okay, I'm getting a message across to this one.
I thought it was a very touching and meaningful process, learning about the lives and histories of other people and reviewing my wife's history. I was very moved. It was wonderful.
I do feel differently, because it was a story that I really hadn't thought about for quite a while. I mean, it's not that I forgot about it, but I really hadn't thought about it. And I think that when we get together, especially with our grandchildren, we need to tell them these stories. I'm not even sure that that we've told our kids about that particular experience. In life there are just so many other things that sometimes will crowd out your stories.
Yeah.
And
I think that because I've been doing genealogy for several decades, this experience has reinforced my strong belief that we not only have to tell our stories, but we have to write our stories down. And I think that that's a very good lesson that I have learned, and that I'm hoping that others will learn, is to write your stories down. They will then really live longer.
Yesterday, I was with my son, who's 38, and he did not realize that I could not have had my bat mitzvah when I was, he went to my b'nai mitzvah, he had his bar mitzvah here. It amazed me that somehow that piece of information passed him by completely. So it just validated the importance of sharing these things.
My parents did the show I was stillbirth, and I never did it. They did the long hour when they told their story. And I always said, they had me for the last few minutes. So I'm so grateful to you, because by doing the video, and George gave me the first video, the long one, I was able to tell my whole stories, and now I have something like the Shoah to leave to my children and grandchildren. So thank you.
Yeah, this experience reinforces it's kind of a common adage. When you go to somebody's retirement party or you go to their funeral, that's when you really find out about them. You really don't know a lot about them. And so it really points out the fact that we really ought to be telling our kids a lot more of the stories of our lives while we're alive.
During school, children are asked at one point to do a genealogy. And it's only at that time that they come and ask. And the question is how to encourage them to come and ask at other times, to really want to ask, because I think that particular experience is a fragmented one. And to put together the whole story is very interesting. One day, my brother and I got together and spent some time talking about our family as we were growing up. And I thought that that was a fascinating experience for us and then to pass along to our children.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hello, I was born Claire Mizrahi in Cairo, Egypt. So was my mother, and we were all Jews. Her father was a Levi, and my father has come from Damascus to marry her. We had a Jew. I want to talk about the Jewish life I had in Cairo, Egypt. We were 100,000 Jews in Cairo at the time before World War II. Things were fine as far as I knew. My mother came to me, she said, "You have to leave with your brother who's going to France to study." I said, "Yes." She said, "You have 2 weeks. Quickly make this and that. You have to pack 1 suitcase, no more." Because that's all we were allowed, and the equivalent of $30 or $40. So when I arrived in France, I had no money. I changed my Egyptian pound to franc, gave some money to keep my suitcase at the consignment at the train station, and realized no money to go sleep in auberge or anything. Okay, so I would have to sleep by myself sitting at a train station. I wasn't going to lie down. My brother wasn't there. So I sat down. Whenever I heard the noise, I would quickly run across to the filthy toilet and lock the door, because I didn't want them to see me. I would not have been safe. My brother tried to sell a diamond which was hidden in a pillowcase that my mother had given him, and we couldn't sell it because we didn't have papers. So that went on. I went to the Sukhnut, who told me, "Oh, you have to pay for the ticket." I said, "Well, I don't have any money, 50 pounds. So I had a bracelet my father had given me. I quickly went to a pawn shop, gave it to him, and whatever he gave me, I gave it to the Sukhnut. We said, "Okay, you can leave in a week." Okay, since I had no money in France, I decided that I could survive on 1 apple a day and whatever water I found in some faucet or something in the streets, okay? And if I had to go to a toilet, I had to pay for it with the few cents that I had. I wrote to my uncle who lived in Manchester, England, asking him to send me money, and he was very nice. He sent me 3 British pounds that I needed badly. At the customs, I kept asking, "Do you know Avram Mizrahi?" Finally, one guy said, "Yes. Yes, I know Avram. He owns the Tnuva nearby," which I didn't know, and he was very nice. He took me to him. Of course, I recognized him, and my father's twin, identical brother. There was no question I would miss him. Avram was very nice. He went back to the port with me, took my suitcase, and took me to his apartment, where I was given a small room and introduced to his wife and son, and a little baby girl. I'd hate to pack. I cannot stand to pack a suitcase again, because I had done it so many times before. It was hard for me to.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hello, my name's Rhonda Kapp, and I'm 66 years old. I make Judaica, which are Jewish ritual objects, and I make mine in copper and bronze. And I'm going to tell a little story about how my passion for my art and my love of Judaism merged. When I was young, I always was immersed in my family with my Judaism. It was always centered around holidays and food and family. My family's very warm and demonstrative, and we would have a large family. We would get together on all the holidays, and just have a lot of very warm memories. And I even asked when I was growing up if I could go to Sunday school. I know a lot of kids need to be coerced and forced into going, but I had the desire to go. When I got old enough, I taught Sunday school, but mostly in the arts. And in summer camps, I always taught art. And one year, I went to a summer camp that I had attended as a child, and I got a job for the summer being the art director. At the camp, when I started to work, there was a woman that lived there, and she was the artist in residence. And her workshop was welding. After I would do my own work, I started to come to her shop and become very good friends with her. And she allowed me to make my first piece there. And the moment I lit the torch was like a spark that my passion for art and my love of Judaism just merged. And I've been doing that. That was in '72. I've been welding and doing Judaica. The very first piece I made was a mezuzah. Even though I was making these ritual objects, there was that love for Judaism that I wanted to know why something was made in a certain way, why it needed to have certain elements. And this was a way that it just merged my passion and my love of Judaism. She had already passed away, and I was able to return to that camp to teach. I was able to stay in her studio and teach the kids just like she did. And it was amazing to be in that place where she was, where I first met her, and to have that come full circle. And then they asked me to make a mezuzah. It ended up being a 3-foot mezuzah for the gate of the camp, of the summer camp. The mezuzot will have seeds at the top of the shin, and my seeds are pointed. Her seeds were round, and they were just different than mine. And I made the mezuzah, and on the shin, I put my seeds. But at the bottom of the root, I put 3 of her seeds, because I felt that that's where everything came from, was, her seeds were ignited in me and grew from there. And my love for Judaism and my art and my passion for art was able to be merged.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Chaplain Dov Cohen, and I'm 73. Been a chaplain for 55 years, starting with the Vietnam War. And we're going to talk about my interaction and relationship with Judaism. Was at seminary when the Vietnam War was heating up in the 60s. Got a phone call, and the Air Force was looking for Jewish chaplains. Said, would you be interested in going in the service? And I said, if there's a need, sure, that's what I wanted to be a rabbi was all about. And then so I flew down to Lackland Air Force Base and was inducted, and I was supposed to accompany an ordained rabbi as a Jewish chaplain and work with him wherever he went. 1 week later, he received a humanitarian discharge, and they didn't have a replacement. And I was asked by the base chaplain, can you do this job, really? And I said, I don't know. I think I can. I'm willing to try. Why don't you call the seminary and ask him if they think I could do it? And so they did, and they said, ask him if he says he can do it, he can do it. Okay, we got an assignment for you. There's nobody here at Lackland. It's the largest training center in the entire Air Force. So we want you to be here for the high holidays. This was in June of 1962. I stayed 5 months. I was supposed to be there about 2 weeks. At the end of that, they said, in order for you to continue, you have to go through chaplain school. So I went through the chaplain school. Everybody else was ordained except me. And I graduated first in my class. And when we graduated, they said, you have your choice of assignments, but for a Jewish chaplain, there are very few. So you can either go to Tachikawa, Japan, to Paris, France, or to Dover Air Force Base in Massachusetts. We know you want to go to Massachusetts. I said, are you kidding? You're giving me a choice to go to to Japan, to France, or to Massachusetts, where I came from. How soon can I go to Paris? And a week later, I landed at Orly Air Force Base. I was there for 3 years, given 5 bases in France, Spain, Morocco, Libya, and Germany. I'm very proud of the fact that I hold a record for Passover. I conducted 16 Seders on 5 bases in 8 days. And it was a joy. It was exhausting. Could never do it these days, but in those days, it was a joy. When I was there, among the things I was able to do that were part of my Jewish involvement were going to the Eagle's Nest, where Hitler had signed for the decree to annihilate the Jewish people. We conducted Shabbat services at that table. It's a wonderful thing. I had some criticism. I had people who said, how could you do that? And I said, because we could do that. Because if we didn't have the chance, none of us would be here and you'd all be speaking German. So it was magnificent.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hi, I'm Jackie Goldberg, known as the Pink Lady, and I'm 85 and a half years young. Today I'd like to tell you the story of how I connected with my Judaism at later stage in life. My parents, their parents, came from Russia and Glasgow, Scotland. And they came to America for a reason. They came to have freedom for their religion, and they came for a new life. When my husband passed away at, I think I was 27, the way in which I found my inner self at that time to get up and to find a new life at that age with 3 children was very difficult. But something inside of me said, you know what? You can do it. And I did. And I found a life. And soon after, about 1.5 years, I met a very nice Jewish gentleman who had lost his wife. And he had 2 children. So I went to my rabbi and I said, I'm thinking, just thinking, Rabbi, of marrying this gentleman. What do you think? He said, well, how do you feel about it? I said, well, he has 2 children, I have 3. It's going to be the Goldberg bunch, and it's only another couple of hamburgers on the table. And he said, you know what? With that attitude, Jackie, you're going to make it. Because what you're doing is opening up your heart and your soul to giving 2 other children a mother and a good home. And it was. And bringing them up, we joined a temple. And it was a very poor temple, the Temple Aliyah, and they were fabulous. But the only thing we didn't have was a real home. So 10 families got together, we each gave a good amount of money, and we built the temple. And that was as close at that moment as I got to feeling, wow, I am a Jewish woman. And my husband was a good Jewish man because we were giving of ourselves. We belonged to the temple for many years as the children became bar mitzvah and bar mitzvah. And then another tragedy hit. My husband died after 39 years. What do? You get up, you get out, and you get a new life. And I reinvented my life. I became an actress, a motivational speaker, and a producer of shows, giving people of an age of 60, 70, and up a chance to live their life the way they wanted.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hi, my name is Mickey Kummel. I'm 91 years old. I'm here to talk about a very important time in my life, about my grandchildren's, twin grandchildren's, B'nai Mitzvah. I'd like to start with when my grandchildren were born. They were 2.5 months old when my husband died. My daughter-in-law needed help because she had twins, a boy and a girl. And her mother couldn't help her because she was busy taking care of a sick man. He had a very serious stroke. So I stepped in, and she needed me, and I needed them as much as they needed me or more. I got very close to them. I really was an important part of their life. She called me up one day, many years later, and said, "What would you think of the twins going to a Jewish day school?" And I said, "Well, what does David, my son, think about it?" She said, "He's fine with it." I said, "Then I am too. I think it's a great idea. I will help you." And I did, and her parents helped. And I developed a close relationship with the teachers, with the grandparents, with the parents, and the children. And it was a very good time. We all did many fun things together. I was invited to all the things that happened at school, things that happened at celebrations, birthdays, etc., that happened in people's homes. I felt very much a part of that community and family. And then the twins were turning 13, and they were having their B'nai Mitzvah. And I was involved in helping plan it. One of the most exciting parts was turning around and seeing these friends of mine. She was struggling with brain cancer, and they made the effort and came out, and I was extremely touched. That was the last time she ever went out in public. And then the B'nai Mitzvah started, and at the end, the family was called up to the Bima, and we all held the Torahs, and it was such a feeling of contentment, of feeling very Jewish, surrounded by people I loved who loved me, and it was a very special moment in my life. My granddaughter decided to make Aliyah to Israel, and she is living there. She's been living there since 2013. Family means a lot. She inherited that from Bee, from her other grandmother, from her parents, and she loves living in Israel. Her twin brother decided to get his master's at Tel Aviv University, and so he's been living there. And it's as though this circle that started when they were born and that went on to Jewish day school, went on to be B'nai Mitzvah, that all of it is just in this wonderful circle of family and the love we have for each other.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Tricia Amy Gold Rothenberg-Roth. I'm a pediatrician, and I'm 72 years old, and I'm here to tell my story of my transformation. Once upon a time, when I grew up in Jersey City, I grew up in a traditional home, my mom and dad, we went to temple, which was right up the block. But my mom's dad was very Orthodox, and she was one of 14 children. So they had a deep traditional upbringing. So when my brother had his bar mitzvah, I didn't really think anything of that because I had a confirmation, and here we were in our beautiful white robes and our little crown of white flowers, and there were only women girls, that is, that had their confirmation because the boys had their bar mitzvah. But, I just accepted that as the way it was. And by the time my kids got to this temple, girls could have their bat mitzvah, and my son had his bar mitzvah. But I kind of wanted to do that too, but I didn't want to interfere with my kids' experiences. So by the time I was 67, I studied for about 3 years and had my b'nai mitzvah. I was very excited to have my bat mitzvah because my first year studying, I had a time conflict, so I really didn't get all the studying in that I needed to, so I had to take another first year over, but what's time? I had plenty of time. And at that time I started with a bigger class, but it ended up with just 4 of us. So I had 2 more years of studying and learning how to chant, learning how to read. Being able to read from something that's thousands of years old and being part of that chain of command. All of my kids came for my b'nai mitzvah. They had already had their bar and bat mitzvahs. And I think there was another thing. When I had my bat mitzvah, there were all of us, all 4 of us, were grandparents. And I think that was very different than being a 13-year-old having a bat mitzvah. So I think I've been trying to find out what my Judaism looks like. And there have been challenges and there have been gifts. In the process of planning the party, how we're going to do it, so we ended up getting fruit that, as a decoration for the bima, really, red and yellow and green and orange, these long columns of fresh fruit that we were going to donate. So it felt really special to be able to do that. I spoke to different members of my family. They were kind of curious why I wanted to do this. And I just felt that it was my time to find out about what my Judaism was, that I wanted to learn what the Hebrew was and what the songs were.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
All right, I am Marcia Spies, S-P-I-E-S. My maiden name was Zeitlin, C-E-I-T-L-I-N, and I am 88 years old, and I'm a Holocaust survivor. At age 11, I was placed in a ghetto with my aunts and uncles. My parents were sent out by the Russians to Siberia, and my father was sent to a Russian labor camp, a mining camp where no one survived, and within a year, he passed away. At the time, I was like 10 and a half, 11. And I remember I shed a tear, but I said to myself, well, I will survive. And that was really a survival of being Jewish. Within 3 weeks, we were placed in the ghetto, which is separated from the Christian people. And we were, it was a barbed wire. No one could go out. We were under surveillance by the Germans. So that was my first encounter of being Jewish, because before I was living in quite a Jewish atmosphere. I went to Jewish schools, and I didn't have the opportunity, to know that I am separated, that I'm different from the other children. we were there for about 2.5, 3 years. But towards the end, there were very few of us left. And so I went out and I found the people who hid me. So I was there hidden by the Christian people and for 8 months. And then through an organization that was called Aliyah Bet, and they were formed by Palestine to rescue the people who survived the ghettos and the atrocities, to take them to Israel, or at the time it was Palestine. I went through a lot of different areas where I found out that I was Jewish. Prior to that, I didn't even realize that I was Jewish. So, I mean, yes, I knew Jewish and I went to a Jewish school, but it was normal. I played, all my friends were Jewish. And here we are, you know, in an atmosphere where we were beaten and watched off. When I left the ghetto again, when I left the ghetto and went in hiding with these people, they were wonderful. And they really took care of me. I mean, you know, they gave me the facility to survive, because I probably wouldn't have survived.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Steve Fox, and I'm a member of Temple Isaiah. And the story I want to tell is about how we face this daunting problem of building a preschool or equipping a preschool from scratch over a weekend. It's an experience which really made a mark on my life and helped, I think, set my path in life and gave me the confidence that I have. It was a Friday night, and on Monday a preschool was supposed to open. We didn't have a preschool. We had some empty buildings. We had huge piles of cardboard boxes that had furniture, games, equipment. There was a mound of sand that you couldn't see over that had to be shoveled out to make a giant sandbox. So this was Friday, and a group of about a dozen of us got together to do this, to put this preschool together. And we worked through the weekend. We worked so hard, but by the time the weekend was over, with all the games, with all the blocks, with all the sand spread out, you know, we looked at it and said, oh my goodness, this is like instant kibbutz. This is like a kibbutz springing up over the weekend in a desert. We were so impressed by what we were able to do, a small group of us working very hard, very committed, with a purpose. It was just wonderful. And that was a model for me for the rest of my life as to what it's possible for a small group who is committed to doing something and pulls together can actually accomplish. I remember a lot of people laughing together, working hard, but there was clearly, boxes, things that had to be discarded, tools, trying to put all these things together, trying to figure out how to put them together. I guess some of us Jewish people aren't that handy. It was a little bit difficult for us, but we did it. We did it. And it was an exhilarating experience. I don't know that they've retold it, but I'm sure all of us who experienced that, who are doing that weekend, have thought about it, and it's really been, it gives you so much confidence that, hey, you can do this. Don't give up. Doesn't look that big. I've told that story many times. I've told that story when people ask me about what's the value of belonging to the temple. And what has this temple done? I tell that story, and I tell that story to people who need encouragement to keep going. So what it taught me was don't give up, keep going. And as the director of religious education used to tell us, every time he'd leave us, he'd say, don't weaken. That was instead of saying goodbye, he'd say, don't weaken, and we remembered that.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Elaine Herman. I'm 86 years old, and I'm going to tell you the story of my early childhood in a small Oregon seacoast town. I was born and spent my childhood in a small village of about 10,000 people on the Oregon coast. There were 5 Jewish families in the town, and my parents didn't like any of them. So my early associations were all Gentile. During World War II, I was 9, 10, 11 years old. I was terrified that the Germans would win the war, because that meant that I and my family would be killed as Jews. My first awareness of Jewishness was around Christmas time. We couldn't have a Christmas tree because we were Jewish. I liked Christmas trees. In my little country school, every room had a Christmas tree at that time of the year, and all the children wanted to have the fun of trimming the tree. But for some reason, the teacher every year always chose me. It was a small town, and everybody knew everything about everybody. They knew I didn't have a tree in my home because I was Jewish. Well, my father had a store, a fashion store, in this little village. And during the Christmas season, it was a good idea to have a Christmas tree in the store. It was festive, it was pretty. It made the women that came into the store feel like buying clothes. And when the tree was installed on a ledge in the store, my father would come home, have his dinner, then go back to the store after hours, and he would trim the tree. And I always wanted to go with him. I wanted to help, but he wouldn't let me. He said it was too dangerous for me. Actually, he liked to trim the tree. One year, I came home from school, again at Christmas time, and I sang Silent Night to my mother. My mother asked me, "Why are you singing that song?" And I said, "Oh, well, the whole class sings it and we have to sing it." The next day, my mother went to school with me. I went to my classroom and my mother went to the principal. And after that, I was excused from singing Christian songs. And this was another awareness of being Jewish, of being different from the others in that little Scandinavian village.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
I'm Stella Doobie, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of my life story. I was born in Vienna, Austria, and I feel I have defied Hitler's intent, and we are here and we are growing. When I was a little girl, nobody made a big fuss about me. So when it came to my 7th birthday, I heard a band and music playing and people clapping. And there I was so excited. And I said, finally I'm recognized for having been born. And they went by my house, and I said, why are they going by? Why aren't they stopping? But they went by and raised their arms and said, Heil! I didn't know what that meant, but I did know it was not for me. I didn't understand what Hitler was, Nazis. I just knew there was fear. And that was the beginning of my little adventure with the Nazis. One of the things was Kristallnacht. It was so scary. It was so frightening because all around you could hear crystal breaking. They were breaking into people's homes, into their stores, and breaking windows. And I didn't understand it. There were incidents like that for the entire year where we were persecuted, just treated like animals. But then one day, thank God, my mother had registered to become, had a number to come to America, and we were going to America. And it was so exciting, but we were so scared. You know, we weren't allowed to take anything, but we took the heel off and put a jewelry in there. And as we're going on the ship, they said, they're taking heels off. That would have meant the end. We would have been in concentration camp. Luckily, it was late, and the ship said, come on, we gotta go. So we came to America, and it was kind of a little bit shocking. It was wonderful to see the Statue of Liberty, but it was very hard to see the environment of Manhattan at that time. But I lived through it, and I grew up, and I spoke English, and I went to school, and I went to college, and I got married to a wonderful husband. Anyway, I have kept up my affiliation with the Jewish community. I study, and I keep learning, and I keep hoping we will continue to grow as a Jewish community, because 6 million were killed. And God darn it, I'm defying Hitler, and we're growing, and I'm helping to make it grow.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Karen Frimkes Wolf. I am 77 years old, and I am an artist, and I happen to be Jewish. And I'm going to talk about how being Jewish had an influence in my work and how it enters my work later in my life. I've always known I was Jewish. I always knew that I had a Jewish family. But when my father came back from the Second World War, we moved into the new veterans housing that was being built in Mar Vista. And we were the only Jewish family on our block, and I was the only Jewish child in my 3rd grade classroom. And my teacher, at one point, it was a holiday of some kind, I think, she singled me out and said, well, Karen doesn't have to do this because she's not going to be celebrating Christmas or something like that. Somehow that made a difference to other people and made me feel kind of separate and alone. This is the one time that I was called a dirty Jew, and I wondered what in the world that could possibly mean, because I thought we were clean. My mother kept a very clean house. I took a bath every day. Why did they say that? But anyway, by the time I was in higher grades, there were other Jewish children in the classes. By junior high, there were several, and then by high school, there were plenty. I was always aware that we were Jewish, although we were not particularly religious. My grandparents were. We celebrated all the holidays. My parents were more political than Jewish, and my father was a photographer, so art was all over the place, all the time. And I always knew I was going to be an artist from the very first I can ever remember, because I like to draw, and I evidently needed to draw all the time. I got a degree in art history, and I developed the class in the history of Western art for visually impaired students and taught it for 17 years. And that is actually what caused me to be interested in being Jewish and art, because all the art that we looked at, all the Jewish stories, were done by Christian artists. There isn't a single word in the Bible that hasn't been illustrated by somebody. I began to look at that as a Jewish person. And I think that that's what caused Judaism to creep into work that I didn't realize had anything to do with it. And only later did I understand that I had done things because I was Jewish. 2 of my small pieces were chosen by Anne Ramadka and Georgia Friedman Harvey, who were the curators for the Los Angeles group that went to the second Jerusalem Biennale in 2015, and they went to Israel. I didn't go, just my work went. Third Biennale, there was a Los Angeles group also, and I was a part of a group of 4 artists who did a collaborative piece. We each did 1 panel in a 4-part piece. And one of my panels went to Jerusalem for that Biennale. So twice my work has been shown in Israel.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hi, I'm Eric Ryder, and I want to speak to you today a little bit about my background and when I first realized it was important to stand up for being Jewish. So I've been active in the Jewish community all my life, growing up in New Orleans, which is a smaller town for a Jewish community. I was active in our synagogue and president of our youth group. When I graduated from high school, I went to Louisiana State University, LSU. And for the first 2 years, I was trying to be active in the Jewish community in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and it was very difficult back then because there were very few of us. I was being active in the Jewish community back in New Orleans was easy because there were 10,000 Jews. It was easy to be Jewish, but it was very difficult to be Jewish on the college campus at Baton Rouge at that point. And the KKK was very active. I mean, they had riots with their full gear and their white hats, and what I realized, they were regular people. They weren't weird people. In fact, the Grand Knight of the Ku Klux Klan, who later became the Grand Knight, David Duke, was in one of my classes. And it didn't look like he was any different from me. But when I realized that we didn't have a Jewish presence on campus, I said something has to be done about that. So I organized a few of my friends, and we began a B'nai B'rith Hillel Foundation on the campus at LSU. Now, they'd had Jews on campus before. They had Jewish fraternities and sororities, but they really didn't focus on the real problem, which was was standing up to the KKK and standing up to what they mean on the college campus. And that's when I realized that you have to stand up for your Jewish roots. You have to, if you don't, nobody else will. So we were able to make a Jewish presence on campus. We were able to have Shabbat dinners and invite lots of people. We were able to put Jewish flyers out. We were able to have programs, not really competing with the KKK, but just to make sure that everybody knew we were there and we made a presence. And when I left LSU, the Hillel was very, very successful. They were still in the same house. B'nai B'rith offered me a job because of what we did. I didn't take them up on it. But nevertheless, that was the time when I felt that Judaism is important. That's when I felt back to my roots that you can make a difference if you realize what's going on, you come up with a plan, and you do it. To this day, I've lived my life working in the Jewish community because of it, as executive director of synagogues around the country. And it all goes back to then. To this day, as I said, I'm active in the Jewish community. I've made a living and a livelihood in the Jewish community. My grown children have all been on birthright, and because it's important. And everybody has a story, but that's my story that motivated me for the rest of my life.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Judy Fryer. I'm 76 years old, originally from New York, now living in LA for 11 years, and I'd like to talk to you about the beauty of Judaism as I have grown to know it, as I have grown to study it and learn more about it and expose others to it. One of my daughters chose to become a more observant Jew and was living in Brooklyn, New York, in a very Orthodox area. And I, who was living in Connecticut at the time, would visit her frequently. And on Friday night, she'd be invited to someone's home for Shabbat meal, and I would be invited as well. One week, I was at a family's home where there were a number of children, and I got to meet the family. A few weeks later, when I returned to visit her, I had some packages for her. And she was living in a two-family home with lots of steps. And one of the young boys who I had met at this family's home came over to me and offered to help me to bring the packages upstairs for my daughter. And when I came down, I thanked him. And he looked at me and he said, "No, I thank you. You've given me an opportunity to do a mitzvah." And I just thought that was so beautiful that this child had incorporated the concept of mitzvot into his life, into his everyday being. I'm a teacher. I've taught for many, many years, and I can't recall anything like that happening in the secular world. Another incident that stands out for me is the very same daughter, later married and had children, and she was living near La Brea. And one day I took my little 2-year-old grandson for a walk. And we were passing a number of meters, and he looked at me and he went, "Grandma, tzedakah." For him, anything that resembled a slot where you put money was tzedakah. And those two stories just warm my heart when I think of how Judaism reaches that young person at such a level that they're not even aware of the beauty that they've imbibed from being exposed to the beauty of our religion. And I find that it's a shame that many young people, including myself as a young person, are not exposed to the beauty of our religion and all that is there. We're not even aware of how most of our law, our American law, comes from Torah. So many things come from Torah. So when we start learning it, and I just love the fact that I've been given the opportunity, and I just hope that more young people will be exposed to what I now have come to learn as being a big value in my life.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hello, my name is Michael Hirschfeld. I'm a young 70-year-old man, and today I'm going to tell you a story about my grandfather. My grandfather was from Cincinnati, Ohio, and once I visited Cincinnati, I had an opportunity to see the gravestone of his father. And on that gravestone it said, "May my children be blessed, and may my children perform good deeds during their lives." My grandfather, who spent most of his life in North Platte, Nebraska, and I used to visit him taking the train from Los Angeles to North Platte. Took 2 days and 2 nights. We would arrive in North Platte about 11 o'clock at night. And I remember I'd get off the train and there was my grandfather and my grandmother at 11 o'clock at night, still dressed in his 3-piece suit. I remember during the winter vacations holding his hand and walking into dark, candlelit rooms where he and I would pass out shiny red apples and bright silver dimes to the less fortunate who had come to the church. We look at that today and we think that's not much to have handed out. But in the 1950s, this was something that was greatly appreciated by these less fortunate individuals. Grandpa appeared on the radio station in North Platte regularly. I can envision people sitting around the radio, listening. He often spoke about Jewish history and about his history and about the history of his family. He wanted the people of North Platte to understand what it was to be a Jew. And being the only Jewish family in this small Midwestern town, he wanted to share with them the values that he had learned from his family, the values that he had learned from his father. I used to talk to my grandfather's heart because he had a hearing aid that went in here and a wire that came down and connected to a mechanism that was in his shirt pocket. So as Grandpa got older, you literally, if you wanted him to hear you, you spoke to his heart. He would get dressed in his 3-piece suit, and he and Mr. McDonald would walk to work every day. They say you could set your clock by the time that they walked to work in the morning. They'd be wearing their 3-piece suits with their kerchiefs in their suit pocket and the watch fob across their chest, across their waist. And their hats, always had the hats. Much of my life is based on the values that I may have received from him. Giving back to community, the Jewish concept of tikkun olam and repairing the world are values that I learned as a youth, not even knowing that they were values that would come to shape my life as an adult.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
I'm Jerry Rabo, 80 years old, and it was difficult for me to find the most memorable issue of Judaism in my life, but the one that does stick in my mind was the one that changed the whole second half of my life, and that was a time when I first wrote something of significance about Judaism and shared a lifetime of Jewish study. The event that to me is the most memorable, not because perhaps it was the most prestigious or important in typical terms, but the one that made the biggest change in my life. The VBS community had just suffered a loss of a young man, a contemporary of my own son, in a tragic traffic accident. And that had been very painful for all of us to go to the Shiva. When there was another Shiva occasion, this was the Shiva, as I recall, for the parent of one of our good friends. But that day, I got a really terrible cold, and I didn't want to bring that into the Shiva house. I was in bed, and I remember just sitting up in bed and thinking about the whole concept of Shiva and what it meant to miss the Shiva and what it had meant that month or two before at that very painful Shiva. And it suddenly dawned on me that something was really missing in the Shiva celebration, observance, and work that our community was doing. We were lost. We would go into the house of Shiva, nobody knew what to say or to whom. And from this, I just reached over. I was a lawyer at the time, so I had at my bedside a 8.5 by 11 yellow pad, just in case I had a brilliant idea about something. I took it and I outlined, just from recollection, what would be the significant things to know about Shiva. And I wrote, I think with a fever, but I wrote feverishly. Somehow or other, I got this entire outline from the first to the last thing people should know, everyone should know. And then I brought it to the rabbis, and they thought it was a really valuable, or could be a really valuable work. So it was the guide to Jewish mourning and condolence, and it was written not as a study document, but as a how-to. Writing that booklet, to me, changed my attitude about what I had to offer the Jewish community.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
I am John Pinus. I'm 76 years old, almost, and I'm going to tell you a story about my grandmother and the influence she had on my life, and much of that is related to the values she had as a Jewish woman. So I'm happy to share this story with you about my grandmother, Pauline, who I knew for many years and got to know extremely well. So my grandmother came originally from a small city in Poland, and she immigrated here at about the age of 20. My grandfather was both a rabbi and a cantor. But he died soon after they had moved to Los Angeles. I was born in 1942, and we lived very close to my grandmother, and I spent a lot of time with her. She lived in a small little apartment, and it was a one-bedroom apartment. Even as small as it was the focus of life in the family. All four of my uncles fought in World War II. And my grandmother had 4 stars in her window representing her sons that were at war, all of her sons. She also had a pushka, a box that she collected funds for charity with. And she was a very charitable person, even though she had no money. She raised always money for good causes. My grandmother lived into her late 70s. She instilled, I think, in all of us, not only charitable work, but the importance of education, something of which she had very little. So I gained very much from that relationship, to the point that later we found out that we had relatives in Russia. And one of the boxes she had of pushka related to the exodus of getting people from the Soviet Union out, and many of whom eventually came to the United States. It turned out that Her rabbi husband had a family there, and they could not leave Russia after the point that he could. My brother and my wife and I went to visit them. They wouldn't talk to us in most places. They said the air has ears, which meant they could listen to all your conversations. So mostly we had conversations outside about what it was like to be a Jew in the Soviet Union. Living in the Soviet Union for them wasn't good. There was a lot of discrimination against Jews. It took almost 15 to 20 years for them to be able to come here. So our family got bigger all of a sudden, with a lot of relatives that we didn't know. If it wasn't for people like my grandmother collecting money and protesting and being activists for this to happen, I don't think it would have happened so quickly, if at all.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Helene Korn. I'm 75 years old, and I'm going to tell you a story about a near-death experience that I had on my very first trip to Israel. Barry and I were traveling all over Europe, but one of the things we really wanted to do was to travel to Israel. Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, and to be able to go to Israel was just a wonderful thing. Having been a scuba diver for a number of years, diving off the coast of California, which is what I was used to doing, was great. We would see Garibaldi. We would see all kinds of lovely fish. I mean, it was wonderful. But in Israel, to dive in Israel, to be able to do that, oh my gosh. So when we got to Israel and were able to go to Eilat, which is a wonderful place, and especially we understand that now it has gotten really popular. It was popular in those days as well, but perhaps not as popular as it is now. It's really famous for the coral reef, and also because the water is so clear and just so beautiful. So diving there was just amazing. I mean, it was so clear. You could see all the way down to the bottom. I mean, it was wonderful. And the fish were so gorgeous, just really beautiful. It was absolutely a wonderful experience. I should tell you that in California, when you scuba dive, you always have some kind of a flotation device above on the surface of the water, so that any boat, anyone knows that there are divers below. Well, when we got to Israel and we were so excited about being able to dive, we were in Eilat, and we went to a dive shop, and we had to rent our gear. And we said, what kind of a flotation device do you have? And the fellow behind the counter said, oh, it's not a problem. Don't worry. We don't have them here. Oh, all right. So we put on our fins and our goggles, and we go out into the water. It was so beautiful. It was absolutely pristine. We saw the most beautiful fish. It was just gorgeous. We made several dives, and it was wonderful. We came up, and we were actually talking to each other, and all of a sudden, he grabs my arm and he says, dive. And there was this huge boat that was traveling right across where we were. We could see it. We could see the bottom. It was a glass bottom boat for tourists, and they hadn't seen us because we didn't have anything to let them know we were there. It was so terrifying. I can't even tell you how terrifying it was. It was just, oh my gosh. It was truly a near-death experience, because had we not seen the boat, had we not dived, we would not be alive. We came back up to the surface. We hugged each other, and said, "Thank you, God. Thank you. Thank you for letting us live."
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Norman Lloyd. I am about to tell you the story of Cinna the Poet in Orson Welles' production of the Mercury Theater's Julius Caesar. I have been asked my age, 103. In the course of this long career, I've had many adventures, of course, but I now have been asked an interesting question. I am Jewish, and the question I was asked is, did the fact that I am Jewish ever affect the work I was doing as an actor? Well, I thought about that, which happened a long time ago. In 1932, I think it was. It was the first production of the Mercury Theater. And I was invited by Orson Welles, who was the director, inviting me to play in Julius Caesar and Cinna the Poet, led me into a path which I had not expected. Oh, one must remember, of course, that Hitler was in power at this time. Fascism and the killing of Jews. In the play, as written by Shakespeare, in the play, Cinna the Poet is only a few speeches. He's killed because his name is the same as one of the conspirators against Caesar. This was a moment when I thought that I was Jewish. Because Hitler was in power and the world knew about his infamy, this was a natural scene for Nazis who stopped this man on the street. And then in the course of the scene, looking for something to give me a sense of fright as I realized that these men, Nazis, who accosted him on the street, accosted him because his name was Cinna. I had these poems in my pocket, which I didn't tell anyone about, not Orson or anyone. And then Orson caught on to that. And he said, grab the poems, throw them, hit them with them, knock them down with them, whatever. And I added one word to Mr. Shakespeare, if you'll forgive me, as they cover me over, so to speak, in their mob. I scream out, the poet, and he's dead.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hello, my name is Barry Korn. I'm 76 years old, and I want to tell you a story about a trip to Israel, which centered on a very special kind of a place called a kibbutz. I have been hearing about Israel my whole life. Sunday school, Hebrew school, family, friends, and was intensely curious. Since this was my wife and our first trip to Israel, we wanted to pack in as much as we could, and one of the things we wanted to do was to visit a kibbutz. We also felt that we needed to volunteer to work on the kibbutz because we couldn't be there and not work and not help support. So we got to this kibbutz, which was called Mishmarot. Mishmarot means guardians in Hebrew. And in fact, there was a munitions factory underground below this kibbutz during the War of Independence. We wanted to take part in the life of the kibbutz, even though we were just temporary visitors. The purpose of a kibbutz is to produce food and other needs as efficiently as possible if you don't have the possibility of everybody have their own job. And it works out very nicely if you work with somebody, make a team effort. One fella in particular, blonde, curly-haired fella, noticed that I was getting along fine with the harvesting and suggested that we join together for Kabla Nud. Kabla Nud means piecework. Means you have a quota of so many oranges to pick a day. The bosses don't care how you do it as long as you get that day's done. And this guy had figured out a better way to do it and suggested that the two of us work together, and we did. And we did this over a period of several weeks. After having worked in the kibbutz, we felt that we were more than just visitors. My wife had a problem with her leg. She had a pinched nerve and had to have surgery in Israel. And we asked and got permission to come back to the kibbutz to recuperate. In fact, she was never without company, felt wanted the whole time we were there. And I asked if they would give me 2 jobs to do. And they said, why? They don't give us 2 jobs to do when we're sick. And I said, yeah, but you live here. And they said, yeah, so do you. We had a blue and white metal box in the house called a pushka, which was a depository for charity. And on every Shabbat, on Friday nights, you'd put some coins in. Your parents would put some paper money in, we would put coins in, and we did this our whole lives. And at some point, we decided that we really wanted to see what this money went to. And we found out when we got to Israel, we saw all these trees, all these wonderful, wonderful trees that didn't exist 100 years ago. And so we felt that our kibbutz experience and the pushka experience helped us feel a part of Israel. And we're very grateful for that.
I used to talk to my grandfather's heart because he had a hearing aid that went in here and a wire that came down and connected to a mechanism that was in his shirt pocket.
There is a phrase in Judaism referred to as tikkun olam, to heal the world.
You know, I've told that story many times. I've told that story when people ask me about what's the value of belonging to the temple.
Being able to read from something that's thousands of years old and being part of that chain of command.
And the moment I lit the torch was like a spark that my passion for art and my love of Judaism just merged.
I didn't understand what Hitler was, Nazis. I just knew there was fear.
2 million Jews left Russia at that time.
And we didn't go to what was called the shul anymore. We went to what was called the synagogue.
Because if you go to Tel Aviv, you must go to the beach.
The year that the State of Israel was established, a very, very exciting time.
And here was my mother with a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old and 10 francs in a suitcase.
My parents were sent out to Siberia with my 2 sisters. And my father was sent to a Russian labor camp, a mining camp where no one survived. And within a year, he passed away.
And I made the decision right then that when I had a family, they were going to understand what it meant to be Jewish.
But we didn't identify as religion or ethnicity. It was just a different world.
They lived long lives, to 107 and 103.
Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. And to be able to go to Israel was just a wonderful thing.
Which was, at the time, a heart of Jewish communal life.
Surrounded by people I loved who loved me, and it was a very special moment in my life.
I really felt an urge to do something good when we were asked to write letters to help free the Soviet Jews.
But when I realized that we didn't have a Jewish presence on campus, I said something has to be done about that.
We were lost. We would go into the house of Shiva, nobody knew what to say or to whom.
I was able to interpret it from my experience, and it all became very meaningful for the first time.
We were really praying for our survival and for the survival of everyone else in the camp alongside us.
They were after people from a different religion, and since I was Jewish, I could not wear anything on me that would indicate that I was Jewish.
I'd hate to pack. I cannot stand to pack a suitcase again because I had done it so many times before. It was hard for me to.
And we found out when we got to Israel, we saw all these trees, all these wonderful, wonderful trees that didn't exist 100 years ago.
I just hope that more young people will be exposed to what I now have come to learn as being a big value in my life.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation. The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
I'm Sandra Babcock. I'm 70 years old, and this is a story about my journey into Judaism, my own Judaism. In 1969, I had finished studying a year abroad in Sweden and began to trek towards down to Piraeus to catch a boat to Israel. My friends and I had hitchhiked throughout Europe all during that year. And I put on my backpack with my Swedish flag on the backpack because in those days it wasn't very safe to backpack in Europe with an American flag on your backpack. And I hitchhiked all the way down to Piraeus and got a boat to Israel. The different facets of living in Israel in 1969, 2 years after the war, 2 years after people felt that they had been relieved and conquered the world. They just had this sense of freedom. And it was a time of discovery and a time for some of us to discover our Judaism and come home and feel like at 22 then, going on 23, I'm just discovering a whole new life for myself. So after a while in Jerusalem, experimenting around the old city and buying a few little trinkets, and I figured I better see the rest of Israel. So I started off to Tel Aviv and took a bus and got off on Hierocon Street
because if you go to Tel Aviv, you must go to the beach. But first, I decided I need to go to a kibbutz. So I went down the road. Somebody said, just go up to the kibbutz office down a higher corner and sign up. So I went into the first office I saw, and I said, I want to go to a kibbutz for 4 weeks. I had to sign up for 4 weeks. I said, okay, they signed me up. They put me on a bus. They gave me a ticket, and I went to Afula, which is up north, near Nazareth. And I get off the bus at Afula, and this truck comes down this hill, rattles down the hill, picks me up, and says, welcome to Kibbutz Dovrat. And in between Kibbutz Dovrat and Nazareth, there was some arid villages. And there were these watermelon fields that were just gorgeous. And one night, the moon was way high in the sky and shining down on the watermelons. And we're standing there, and in the moon, I mean, it was just perfect. Big moon, the moonlight on the watermelon fields. And across the fields comes this man in white robes on a white horse galloping through the watermelon fields. So my friends and I are going, oh my God, we're being invaded. And we ring the bell. Oh my God. And all of the emergency resources kick into effect. The children are woken up. They're all taken down into the shelter. The army comes out. You know, all the guards come out with their guns. And then they say, who rang the bell? And we're like, we did. Why? Well, we said, you know, the guy with the horse with the thing. And they said, yeah, he's the mayor of the Arab village who protects the fields.
My name is Pinchas Cohen. I am the Dean of the Lerner Davis School of Gerontology at the University of Southern California. I was very excited about this idea. This concept of intergenerational connection and mentoring is part of who I am and part of how I grew up. I was born in Israel, and while I was born into a secular family, the fundamental concept of Judaism were part of how I was raised. The concept of tikkun olam and tzedakah, where it's our responsibilities as members of society to support others, to do good things, and to be pillars of goodness and righteousness. The element of intergenerational connection, which in Hebrew is called dor vador or medor ledor, really represents that one generation connects to the next. It's important to mention that the mission of the Dor Vador project is highly connected to the mission of the Lerner Davis School. We emphasize intergenerational connectedness, the importance of mentorship, and aging with purpose. And finally, I'd like to state my gratitude to Professor George Shannon, who's been leading this project with insight and inspiration.
Hi, my name is Dr. George Shannon. I'm a professor at the University of Southern California, Lerner Davis School of Gerontology. I want to talk to you a little bit today about the Dor Vador program. The Dor Vador program is founded on Erickson's seventh stage. The seventh stage involves the conflict between generativity, or expressing one's true values, understanding, and experience, against stagnation, which is the antithesis of that. So we thought we would take this idea that was founded in theory and develop a program that involves communication between generations, Dor Vador, generation to generation. We chose film as the medium that we wanted to work with because film is part of the social media that young people understand and work with all the time. What we hope to do is engender this feeling of creativity and art, both with the older adults and the young adults. I worked in the entertainment business for over 30 years, so film is something that I know quite a bit about. This is perfect for this intergenerational communication. It works for the older adults, it works for the children. It's archivable. It's something, a legacy that can be passed on from generation to generation. So we interviewed over 40 older adults. These were stories that resonated with these older Jewish adults, stories that went from the Holocaust to a trip to Israel, moments that made them realize how important their Jewish heritage was to them. Their Judaism was so firmly set in their minds that it became so significant in those moments of importance. So we showed them to over 100 young children, and we thought this would be a perfect opportunity for them to associate, to understand, to learn from older adults, and at the same time work within the medium that they understand so that they could create works of art that would be interesting and acceptable and really have a kind of meaning for them that we might not otherwise be able to capture. These interviews, having been filmed, left us with an archivable legacy for generations to come. The Door-to-Door program was a resounding success. It exceeded our expectations for intergenerational communication. Anytime you complete a project like this, especially one that is so close to the heart and has been so successful, you hope that other sites, other people will take diverse populations and replicate it so that others can experience the same thing we experienced. Thank you. My name is Dr. George Shannon from the Leonard Davis School of Gerontology. The Door-to-Door program, from generation to generation.
My name is Linda Broder. I'm 76 years old, and one of my favorite memories from childhood and my favorite stories is the story of Purim and the story of Queen Esther and how she stood up to the King Ahasuerus and actually saved the Jewish people in Persia. As a little girl, my mother wanted me to be more outgoing, and she dressed me up as Queen Esther, and when I was in costume, I guess I felt a little more outgoing and really got into the story of Purim and Queen Esther and how she was a strong woman, ultimately. I remember when I was a teenager, I read a book called Behold Your Queen, which was a novel, but it was based on the story of Esther. And one of King Ahasuerus' right-hand men was Haman. Haman suggested to the king that the Jewish people who were becoming more powerful should be put to death. And the king thought, oh, well, if you think so, Haman, okay. And so he decreed that on a certain date and time, the Jewish people would be put to death. And he had Haman construct gallows to hang the Jewish people. And Mordecai went to Esther, and they discussed this. The king had to invite the women to come to see him. The women could not go to him. But Esther sent him a message that she wanted to have invite him and Haman to a dinner. And she did this, and the king and Haman came to this dinner. At the dinner, Esther told him that she was a Jewess and would be one of the people he would be putting to death. And King Ahasuerus thought about this, and he did not want that to happen. And so he asked who was behind this, that the Jewish people should be put to death. And of course, it was Haman. And so the king revoked the decree and suggested that the person who was responsible for the building of the gallows should hang on the gallows, and that was Haman. I guess what really made me so intrigued with the story of Esther was that she was strong, and she approached the king even though those who approached him could be put to death, because that was not an acceptable thing. When I first read the story of Esther, I thought of how the Jewish people were during the Holocaust and how there were strong people who lived through it and escaped. Men and women who have to stand up for themselves regardless of their sexual orientation or what their personal beliefs are. And I've always admired her and admired the Purim story.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
I'm Karen Schuster Friedenthal. I'm 64 years old, and today I'm here to talk about my Jewish heritage and generations to generations of being Jewish in my family. From the time I was 5 years old, I went to temple at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. My mother taught there for 2 hours every Saturday or Sunday, and my brother and I were taken down to the temple. And it wasn't my favorite thing to do after being in school for 5 days a week and then having to sit there and learn Judaism. But girls were not bat mitzvahed in those days. The boys were bar mitzvahed. So I didn't have to learn Hebrew, and to this day I don't know any Hebrew, except a few prayers because of my children. I would go every weekend for the semesters in Sunday school. I even had my mother as a teacher in 5th grade at Sunday school. But it was difficult getting us to go. And in all honesty, I wish I did it later in life, because once my children went to religious school, and they went from nursery school through high school to a Jewish school and high school, that was very, very reformed. So we didn't, they learned the prayers. They were both bar and bat mitzvahed, which as a mom I was really proud of, and really proud of my heritage. And when I was a little girl in temple, I used to wonder, who is God? What is God? And I think that everybody goes through that in some time of their life. I know my children did. I've learned so much more as my children got older about the Jewish religion. And to me, it's so much about heritage, and it's from generation to generation, like Dor Lador, and my kids sang that at their bar and bat mitzvahs. It's something that I feel very, very strongly that should be passed on to from my children to grandchildren. And more not about the religion so much, but about the generations to the generations. Like I said, I think the most important part about the Judaism that I love is the heritage and family. Family is so important. From cousins, grandparents, mothers, fathers, children, cousins, we all get together all the time. And I feel like a lot of that is what we have learned from generation and from being Jewish.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Esther Benjamin Schifrin. 80 years ago, I was born in China of a Jewish family that had been there for more than a century. My family had stayed first in India for a few hundred years and then migrated to Shanghai. As a child, I knew that we were growing up Jewish in Shanghai because we observed all the Jewish holidays and all the Jewish rituals, and we stuck together as a community. When the war broke out, all of us who had been in China for all those years, who were British, were the allies, and so we were interned by the Japanese during the Japanese occupation of Asia and Shanghai. And so, unlike the refugees who came to Shanghai and were interned in a small area called Hongqiu, and they were only there for the duration of the war, and shortly afterwards they all left. We were long-time China people, and so we were interned alongside all the allies, the Americans and the Belgians and anyone else who was an enemy alien. Because there were so few of us, the Jewish British people, there were only 3 Jewish families in my camp. There were about 8 or 9 POW camps in Shanghai. So as Jews, we stuck together and we observed all the rituals, no matter how difficult it was. We had some friends in the camp, and one of them was a young man. His name was Johnny Elias. And we had roll calls in the morning and in the evening. And on Friday nights and during Jewish holidays, he would crawl along the passageway, because we were all interned in a school initially. And so those were rooms along a passageway. And he would crawl along the passageway because there was a curfew and he was not allowed to do it. So he didn't want to be detected, and he'd crawl to our room. My mother lit Shabbat candles using cotton wool to make wicks, and she'd put them into oil and light them. And we would do the Shabbat prayers together, and it was actually beautiful because there was so little light, and the light would flicker and you'd see the reflection on the walls of the room. The windows were blacked out because we weren't allowed to have any light because the Japanese didn't want any bombing to go on. And so I never forgot the impression that it left on me as a child, that this was a very special thing to be a Jewish person and to take such a risk crawling down a passage to get into a room to say the prayers with us. And the prayers had so much meaning because of that, because we were really praying for something. It wasn't abstract, you know, God please help us or Shabbat Shalom or anything. We were really praying for our survival, and for the survival of everyone else in the camp alongside us.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hello, my name is Bob Friedenthal. I'm 69 years old. I have a lot of history, family history in California, and that's a very rare experience for Jewish people here in California. So my family immigrated from Germany in 1830. They came through Baltimore, settled in Shreveport, Louisiana, and then they took a clipper ship around the Cape and moved from, settled in San Francisco and moved immediately to Sacramento, where they mined for gold. And I have a pocket watch that was mined out of Sutter's Fort in the year 1849, and the engraving on the watch says that the watch was mined during the gold rush, 1849, by Grandpa so-and-so, and it's always been a fascination. So California does have a lot of history with Jews. This pocket watch has such a powerful meaning for people that in my kids' 4th grade, when they were both in 4th grade, I went in and I lectured in their classes about Jews and California history. They both went to Jewish schools. I'm the one that pushed to have kids go to Jewish schools. I wasn't raised very Jewish. I grew up in a suburb of San Francisco. There were only 6 Jews in my high school class out of 300 to 400 people. So the identity was missing for me. And when I married my wife, we decided I'm the one that really pushed for the kids going to Jewish school, and this is where I ended up lecturing about California history that goes back to the gold rush. So it's quite an exciting thing to see kids, because most Jewish kids cannot relate to any kind of history in California. They only go back 1 or 2 generations. And I'm glad that I have identity, and this is why I pushed my kids to have identity as well, because it's missing today. That's one of the big things that I think more people need, is a better identity. So it's been a great experience.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Jerome Arroesti. I'm going to talk about my life growing up in the Bronx as a Bronx Jew. We lived in the Bronx, which was at the time a heart of Jewish communal life. We were Ladino speaking, and almost everyone we knew spoke Ladino. Ladino was very, very important. Our entire community, even the grocery store, Matarazzo and Tarragano, were Spanish Jews. We lived with my grandparents across the street from a high school. And around the corner was Joe's bookstore. Joe was a guy who wore a kippah and had used books and books in Hebrew and religious books and comic books. So I would buy comic books, 3 cents a piece. I don't know if anyone knows what a comic book is today, but it was part of my growing up. I lived about 8 or 9 blocks from Yankee Stadium and about 12 blocks from the Polo Grounds, and there was something called the Police Athletic League. For 55 cents, you would sit in the bleachers and watch the Yankees. The Yankees had one incredible player named Joe DiMaggio, and there was the great Jewish player named Hank Greenberg, who played for the Detroit Tigers. There were not many Jewish players, later on Sandy Koufax, but Hank Greenberg was an incredible hitter. So those were the Jewish part of sports for me. Oh, the best part of going to the stadium was that we would stand outside as kids and collect autographs. It was a big deal to collect an autograph of the players. And most of the players were very amenable and very nice. And some players said, "Go away, kid," and that was really awful. But, and then you would trade the autographs, or you would have baseball cards. I don't know if anyone remembers baseball cards. And to get a baseball card signed by a live player was the biggest deal you could do. We also played stickball. I wasn't very good, and the real question in stickball, there are manholes on the streets, and how many manhole covers you would hit. There were 2 kinds of stickball. One was pitching, where you could throw the ball and someone would have to hit it, and the other one was you throw it up in the air and hit it. And it turns out, even though I was a crummy athlete, I learned how to throw a knuckleball. And I was actually very good at doing that. I was terrible at anything else, but my knuckleball was unbelievable. The temple that we belonged to had a sanctuary for prayers, and then it had a social hall. And often the men would play poker in the social hall. Of course, not on the holidays and not on Shabbat. And so, to me, there was something inextricably wound between card playing and praying.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hello, I am Bella Schimmel Desser. I'm 89 years old, and I'm a medical doctor. The story I will tell you is about when I was 14, 15 years old, when my grandfather bought a house on the Magathie River in Maryland. My grandfather sort of came from a religious tradition. He came from Poland, sang in the choir, boys' choir at the time, went to England and then to the States, but carried on his Jewish tradition of going to shul on Friday nights and on Saturday and walking, twice a day prayers. And he got his two sons involved, one mostly, and who had become an Orthodox, but went to Chicago and joined that community. My mother's side, more observant. My father's side, not. But when he married my mother, he joined her and her synagogue, her father's orientation. But they lived long lives, to 107 and 103. I grew up in Baltimore. It was a small house on a small river, but the river was interesting and active and had all the signs of the tides and the various kinds of fishes and animals and seaweeds that were in the river. I spent time on the river in my red canoe to row around the various inlets that we saw on the river, as well as to check on all of the houses that lined the river and to see what was going on there. People who had boats, people who had big parties, people who were out fishing. I spent time on the land where I tried to grow fruits and vegetables. And then I spent time walking the byways of the countryside, looking for fruits, mainly blackberries, and enjoyed the cooking and preparing the fruit and the eating of the fruit. One day we came home and found that we had lots of red spots and itchy spots all over the lower part of our body. We asked the adults at the time, and they said they were chiggers, and they lived in the brush around the blackberry bushes. So beware when you go walking along the road. Stay on the road and don't go back further where there are luscious berries, but chiggers too. I like the berries, but not the chiggers.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Lucienne Kahan Aroesti, and I'm a Holocaust survivor. I'm going to tell you some stories that happened to me in my childhood and during the Holocaust and after, when I came to America. I was only 5 years old when the war started, and I was very fortunate. I had a most wonderful mother, a loving mother, a caring mother, and because I was such a young child and I had this mother always there for me, I don't think I had some of the fears and some of the traumas some of the older people experienced during the Holocaust. My mother was always there, and I always felt secure. I was very fortunate. We tried to go into France and leave Belgium the first time. And when we got to the border, my father was taken a prisoner by the French because my father was originally from Czechoslovakia. He was not a Belgian or French citizen. And they took my father to the police station. We didn't know where he was. And here was my mother with a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old and 10 francs in a suitcase. She didn't know what to do. We went back to the police station. There were dead horses and everything. My father was nowhere in sight. So my mother tried to figure out, this was in France, how to get back to Belgium. It was what they called the Exodus. So somebody told her, when you go on a train, you should sit in the middle of a train, because when they bomb a train, they bomb the front and the back. So my mother followed the advice. She sat in the middle, and we were in one of these cars, there were no seats, just sitting on the floor. And we were in this village. My mother had no money, no clothes. So from there, my mother tried to get on the road to walk back, to get back to Belgium. So at one night, she stopped at the farm and she said to the farmer, "Would you mind if I slept here with my children? I will work for food." And he said, "Okay, you can sleep in the barn." A few minutes later, he came in and he said, "Why don't you come in the house? I have children also." That night, the barn was bombed and all the animals were killed. So by the grace of God, we survived. My mother took us to our grandparents because she had no money. We still didn't know where my father was. He was somewhere in France. She goes back to the apartment one day and she sees a bottle of liquor open with a glass. She said, "Oh, Edward is home." She jumped on the train, and of course, meanwhile, my father had gone to my grandparents and we were reunited. Then eventually, after the war, we got back to Belgium. My father had brothers and sisters in the United States, and we had a visa to come. But in '49, the consul said, "If you don't use your visa now, you're going to lose it." My father had $6,000. We took the Queen Elizabeth, the boat, that was very exciting, to New York. I remember we got to New York, we got off the boat, and they have these stevedores, the people who carry your luggage. And so my father gives the guy a quarter. He threw it back at us and he said, "In America, we use paper money."
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Selma Patent, 86 years old. I grew up Jewish in a lot of different places. Brooklyn, New York, Kansas City, Kansas, Great Neck, New York, and now Los Angeles, California. So when I was 6 years old, my mother, father, and I moved to Kansas City from Brooklyn. And that was a very, very big change. And we didn't go to what was called the shul anymore. We went to what was called the synagogue. And it was far from our house, and it meant that you had to drive there. And I went to Sunday school. And the big thing I remember there is coloring in the robes on the different pictures of Moses and the different religious people, but I didn't really learn very much. But somehow I went for 6 years, and when I was about 12 or 13, my father joined the Navy, and my mother took that opportunity to move back to Brooklyn, which she felt was really the right place for her to be, near her family, where my father's family lived in Kansas. Many Jewish people in the United States at that time had the opportunity to find work in other parts of America. And so they actually, as my grandfather did, got on a horse and wagon and moved west to find a place where they could use the skills that he had. But my grandfather settled in Kansas, and he opened a plumbing supply, and he was, and that's where my father decided to go. And so there I was in Kansas City. I was the only Jewish child in the school that I went to. But life moved on, and I moved back to Brooklyn, New York when I was about 12 and a half and so forth, and lived in an all-Jewish community once again. And so that served me well because I felt more nurtured in that environment. I remember eating everything that my mother wanted me to eat for dinner so that I wouldn't get into any trouble with her, and that she would allow me to go to shul with my grandfather, because that's something I really wanted to do. And I felt such a sense of belonging to this something exciting and warm feeling, and the gentleman carrying the Torahs and the children with their little flags following after them. And it was such a wonderful, warm thing that even after all these many years, I still remember it with such fondness. I guess the message would be that how important it is for people to bring their children to shul with them, or to synagogue or temple, whatever they belong in to, because I think that's really your early roots really matter to you. And I think that you live with that all of your life if you've had the opportunity to have that at the very beginning. And I think grandparents can offer something to grandchildren that parents maybe don't even think about. That it's just another generation that's pure love and not so much discipline or expectation, just love.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Dancer, Bob for everyone else. I'm 93 years old, and my story is about my heroes as a teenager growing up in the Bronx in the 1940s. Everyone has a hero. There is a book out now called Jewish Jocks, and it's a story of great Jewish athletes. One of them was Sid Luckman, a quarterback at Columbia and later the Chicago Bears. He went to Columbia, was a fine quarterback, and though Columbia was never famous for great football teams, they did win the Rose Bowl in 1934. And this was about 1939, 1940, when George Halas, the owner of the Chicago Bears, hired Luckman and became one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of football. He went on to become the quarterback at the Chicago Bears, and the Chicago Bears won championships. As a matter of fact, in one of the national championships, which was called before the Super Bowl, he and the Bears beat the Redskins 73-0. I was ice skating that day. I still couldn't believe it. Then I went to a game at the Polo Grounds where the Giants used to play in New York City. In those days, the admission was 55 cents. I was in high school at the time, if you can believe that. Luckman came, Luckman was playing. He was in the Coast Guard at the time and got a day off to play against the Giants. And on the very first play, it was a reverse to a fellow named Bill Osmanski who ran for a touchdown, and this was the beginning. The Giants were like nothing. He was throwing passes to a great end called Ken Kavanaugh. He was my hero. I love football. I still do. I did take an MBA at Columbia because, to me, going there was like winning the Super Bowl, and it still is. Another hero of mine was Hank Greenberg on the Detroit Tigers, and they played against the Chicago Cubs in the 1945 World Series. I was in the service that time, and I was an American League fan because I was from New York. And I do remember saying, well, I'm hoping Detroit wins, and some jerk of a racial other GI said, oh, that's because he's Jewish. I said, no, that's because he's a great ball player. Greenberg in 1938, he had 58 home runs, just too shy of Babe Ruth's record at that time of 60. It is said that it's a myth probably because they didn't want a Jew to beat Ruth's record, so they kept walking him, but I don't believe the story. You're out to win a ball game, not to be political. And these are my heroes, and they are, and I still love baseball, I still love football, I probably always will. Though at my age, I will probably never play center field or anything else.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
I'm Corinne Schuster. I'm 93 years old, and my topic today is to take you through my childhood in Los Angeles, California. I was born in Los Angeles 93 years ago, and I'm still in Los Angeles. It's been a very interesting journey because this city was completely different than it is now. It was more relaxed, there was more sun, and there were more palm trees. We didn't have huge neighborhoods of Jewish people together like we do here today. There were certain areas of the city where there were more than others. But like, I didn't grow up in one like that. We had blackouts in Los Angeles during that time. We had all lights out in the whole area because of the war. And in case there was bombing, fortunately, we never had anything like that. Don't forget, we were on the West Coast, which was different, I think, than on the East Coast in relation to the war and the anti-Semitism and everything out here. I didn't hear of it much. They'd been fighting in World War II, and that was one of the sad parts of the time that I lived through in Los Angeles. The food was rationed. It was, you got as much meat as there were people in the family, divided up. However, the meat rationing did that. The most severe, I guess, was the gasoline. And butter, people missed butter. We wouldn't miss it today. We've got margarine, but we didn't have it then. We got butter once a week. We had meat once a week. We had shoes that were not made of leather. They were made of cloth, mainly grosgrain, because the leather was made for army wear. And when I went to school, we had gas rationing. So if we carpooled with some of our schoolmates, we would get a gallon or two more of gas per week to get from here to school. One day, my father brought a box into the house, and he said, "Sit down and be quiet and listen to this." And he plugged it into the wall, and it was a radio. We had never had a radio before. And everybody sat around and listened to the radio, especially Walter Winchell, who was one of the big commentators on Sunday afternoon. We all had to keep quiet and listen to Walter Winchell, who would say, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and all the ships at sea." And that was the introduction to his program.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Louise Spitzer, and I will soon be 87 in 3 weeks, and I'm here today to tell some of my life story growing up in Los Angeles, being Jewish, and not really understanding what it meant to be Jewish, since my family life was not religious in any way, just the opposite. My father, who immigrated here from Russia, was anti-religion, but he wanted us always to feel proud that we were Jews. When I was growing up, my father was anti-religion, and therefore we never went to temple, but we were supposed to be proud that we were Jews, and this was somewhat difficult since you didn't really understand anything about Judaism. When I was a very young teenager, I was at Hollenbeck Junior High School, and a group of kids decided to chase me home. At that time, it was the peak of the Pachuco movement, which was a movement, I believe, throughout the country. There was a famous play, Zoot Suit, based on it, and it was about the Pachucos being anti-American, and they all dressed in zoot suits. The group of kids who decided to chase me home were part of the Pachuco movement. I was very small for my age, and I was very frightened because they were throwing things at me. They were throwing rocks, bottles, whatever they could get their hands on. I was very fast, and I managed to get home without being hit. And when I got home, it dawned on me that being called a dirty Jew didn't mean anything unless I knew what it meant to be a Jew. And I made the decision right then that when I had a family, they were going to understand what it meant to be Jewish. I felt fear, and I also felt ignorant that I didn't really know what it meant to be Jewish. It wasn't until later that my father became involved in the Zionist movement, and as I mentioned, became a gun runner for Israel. He never really became religious until one of my sons, who happened to fall in love with Judaism, went to him, and then he started coming back to the religion. But for me, it was so important to understand what it meant to be a Jew and to teach it to my children so that they never felt inadequate if they were approached with any kind of anti-Semitism.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
My name is Esther Mueller, and I was born in Argentina. I'm going to be 87 years old in April, and I want to talk to you about what it was to grow up in Argentina till I came to the United States when I was 15 years old. Now, as I was growing up in Argentina, which was a democracy at the time, and I lived in a neighborhood that was very Christian. There were no Jewish people were living in there because it was the center of town, and my parents had a store. I did not go to, my parents did not belong to a synagogue because my father kind of felt that being Jewish was doing the Jewish things when you were home, lead a Jewish life, and you did not need to live in a synagogue or belong to a synagogue. We did not belong to a temple in Argentina. As a matter of fact, my father tried to give me Hebrew lessons, but it turns out that the school that he sent me to, they were trying to teach me German instead, and he was very upset about that situation. But then in Perón, who was to be the next president of the Argentina, excuse me, he came to power, and this was during election time, and he was eventually turned out to be a dictator. And there were quite a few riots going on in the city, and I was a student at that time in a private college, and I could not wear my uniform. Many times I had to hide that because they were persecuting the students. Also, they were after people from a different religion, and since I was Jewish, I could not wear anything on me that would indicate that I was Jewish. So when I finally came to the United States, before he became president after the election, and I was able to wear my mezuzah, which was given to me by my father when I was much younger. Going back to how I felt when I came to the United States, and the fact that I was able to wear the mezuzah openly in the streets and walk around with it, I felt very free, very comfortable at the time, and so I felt very free to display that I was of a Jewish religion. Now, as a Jew living in Los Angeles, I feel very free that I am a Jew. I do not hide the fact anymore. So that was a great, the ability to do that and to be able to go to school and display it and not being afraid to show what my religion was, really was a great freedom that I never experienced up till that time when I came to the United States.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hi, my name is Ron Lever, and I'm 87 years old. I want to tell you about my story. I have written a book, which I will read a story out of to you, and I think the importance of what I want to tell you, that it's important to lead a Jewish life, which I have, and I'm very proud to say that I have, and it's a good way to live. It's important for our aunts, for our children and their children to know about us, and I want them to know what their heritage was like. I tell a story about my grandparents in Russia. The thing that drove them out of Russia was the fact that the Tsar was going to take the young boys, the bar mitzvah age boys, into the army. And the Tsar's battle tactic was to overwhelm the enemy with numbers. And so they were going to take the Jewish boys in at the age of 12 and put them in the front. And they didn't trust them. They didn't even give them guns. So they were just supposed to be what they call cannon fodder. So 2 million Jews left Russia at that time. They were the ancestors of most of the Ashkenazic or European Jews that live in this country today. When we came to this country, my parents had to learn English. They had to take menial jobs that nobody else would take. I'm proud of living a Jewish life. Now, taking up my story after I was introduced to real Judaism by my wife. But I want to tell my story because it's typical of the Jewish kids of my age, no matter where they lived. I happen to live in Los Angeles, but if they lived in New York or Chicago or Cleveland, their stories were all the same. And it's important that they know where they come from.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hi, I'm Jo Seligman, and I was born in the Bronx, New York. I'm 81 years old, and I'm here to tell you about some of my experiences of being a Jew, and in particular, my experience at the Hollywood Bowl performing the day that the State of Israel was established. The first experiences I can think of are my mother lighting candles every Shabbos. It was very important to her because she was from a Hungarian background. All my grandparents were from there, and she was observant. So this is how she established her home, our home. She kept kosher, and so those were some of the things to start with. When I was 10 and a half years old, was the year that the State of Israel was established. A very, very exciting time. It turned out that the little youth group from the Breed Street Shul was invited on about a day's notice to perform at the Hollywood Bowl to honor the State of Israel. There were thousands of people there. I guess the Hollywood Bowl must hold about 20,000. There was a reflection pool, which is now the very high-end seats, and we performed on sort of a catwalk where we could do the Israeli dancing, and it was very, very exciting. I had never been to the Hollywood Bowl before, and that part was exciting. I had never performed I had never danced publicly. I loved to dance, but I never danced publicly. And there I was doing the horror with the youth group in front of all these people at the Hollywood Bowl. The fact that Israel became a state was a very, very important day. As a 10-and-a-half-year-old, it's very difficult to really understand the importance of that. But as time went on, I started out with with it being very important to me, and it has continued being important to me through many, many phases of my life, including now. That particular day was very important because it established the importance of the State of Israel in my mind, and it established the importance of Jewish community, having seen all these people who were there and jubilant for such a historic and important day. And it really established my Jewishness and the importance of being a Jew and connecting with the community and connecting with Israel. Being Jewish, to me, is a lifelong experience. It's a daily experience. It's who I am, and that's how I describe myself. I've also continued my connection to Israel.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
Yes, I'm Edith Sobel, and I'm 87 years young. At least I think I'm young. Today I thought I would talk about being Jewish and how I always felt that part of being Jewish was to do service work to your community. We call it, in Judaism, tikkun olam. It means helping to repair the world. Now, I started out when I was just 12 years old. I joined the Jewish Y, and we were approached if we had time off, if we could go to the Mount Sinai Hospital during our week's vacation and help serve meals to the patients at the hospital. Well, we were called candy stripers, and we put on these smocks, and I loved going. I felt so important, walking through the hospital halls, and I really enjoyed. People were so appreciative of everything you did. So I thought, this doing service work not only helps other people, but it was good for me, too. I really felt an urge to do something good when we were asked to write letters to help free the Soviet Jews. And we did. We all got together and we wrote these letters. And I think they were valuable because some Soviet Jews did get out of the Soviet Union into safety at the time. Then there was a time when the Jewish Camp Council wanted me to come and be on their board because I had worked with seniors, and the United Way was helping to give money to our senior program at the camp. So I felt really good being part of that experience. I never felt so good at being a president of anything. I mean, I ended up being a president of the National Council of Jewish Women, and I ended up being a president of the Jewish Camp Council. But really, my passion really was for a one-to-one with people and trying to help them in any way that I could.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hello, I'm Greg Zuckerman. I'm a professor of mathematics at Yale University, and I'm here to tell you the story of how I became aware of my Jewish background and heritage from a very early age. I want to tell you the story today of my Jewish roots. I'm a very secular Jew. It's even hard to get me into a temple, although if you try, you might have some chance. But I've been very conscious of my Jewish roots from a very early age. A very remarkable story that my father told me when I was very young about his father from Poland, was raised by an Orthodox Jewish family, but at the age of 12, he decided on his own to leave the Orthodox tradition, became very involved with the Russian Jewish Socialist Party, which was extremely active. This was one of the competing movements in Poland at the time, and my grandparents were so seriously involved that by the time my grandfather turned 15, he managed to get himself arrested by the Tsarist police. My grandfather's spirit was never broken by this long imprisonment. He was allowed to have some books to read. One of the books that was his favorite, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. The Count of Monte Cristo is imprisoned in a French prison. So my grandfather identified with the hero of this book and dreamed that someday, just as the hero was, that he would be released from prison. So you understand that although he didn't identify with the Orthodox Jews, he did strongly identify with the socialist Jews, and they were an entity unto themselves. There were a rather substantial number of Jews who were very much opposed to the Tsar, very much opposed to the Russian Orthodox Church, and they were trying to forge a socialist revolution which would bring progressive thinking and new rights for men and women to Poland and Russia.
The Door Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hi, I'm Georgia Mercer. I'm 76 years old, and I'm going to talk with you today about my journey to Judaism. I'd like to share a few memories of when and how I realized how it felt to be Jewish. Not being raised that way for 18 years, one memory was when I went to this college in Roanoke, Virginia, which was a Lutheran endowed college, small college. I can remember going through the pledging process and hearing some talk about her mother is Jewish, and that, what? I mean, I never heard that prejudice before in my life, or that's not, you're not 100% okay. My father was Lutheran, an immigrant from Germany, Russia, Poland, that part of the world, and my mother was Jewish. So I went to church as baptized as a Lutheran, my father's religion, and I have 3 brothers. We were dropped off at church every Sunday for years and years and years. I didn't really know much about Judaism. That's where I met my husband, who had started the Jewish fraternity. The house for the Jewish fraternity was across the street from my dorm. So I started dating Jewish guys and wound up 2.5 years later marrying my husband. Anyway, so I only went to Roanoke for 2 years and then transferred to the University of Florida in Gainesville. My parents had moved from New York to Florida. We were engaged and to be married. And so when I was at the University of Florida, I studied with a Hillel rabbi, because just to be sure that I would know what I'm doing and what the differences are in how the traditions are different. I think becoming identified through the Jewish traditions, I'm always able to find a path. And I found that what I really believed in my heart for all my life were the basic tenets of Judaism. And we were married by a conservative rabbi, same thing. No conversion, no anything, but my life was one of believing that religion and values, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
The Dor Vador program, from generation to generation.
Hi, I'm Roseanne Bell, and I'm at the cusp of being 65. I will be turning 65 in June, and I take pride in that because there's a journey. When my father passed away, August the 12th, 1999, my emotional lungs collapsed. My heart splintered. He imbued within me the thirst for knowledge. My father was born in Glasgow, Scotland. He was poor. His professors, and that's what they were referred to when my dad was growing up, they implored upon his parents to let him go to the university. He couldn't. They needed him to work. So at 16, my father left school, graduated from high school, and went on to work. My father was very aligned to Judaism. Most people don't realize that Glasgow has a very strong community of Jews. I was very fortunate that in 1997, I believe it was, my father's brother was an art professor at the University of Glasgow, and he had passed away, and my mother and I joined my father for the unveiling of my uncle. I saw him go to his parents' graves, his brothers' graves, and I really don't have the words of how that was really seared into me, because Judaism, for me, and I do believe for my father too, it's being. There is a word, I may have alluded to it before, it's ruach, it's spirit, it's the wind. That's how we also refer to God. God is amorphic, and that's where the challenge comes in. Every night I kiss my mezuzah, and I purposely bought for my bedroom. It's of a little girl in a pleated skirt, and she's reaching on tippy toes. And that's still the child within me, and I get emotional because that spirit, that ruach, is within me. My chronological age, June the 9th, will be 65. At times, my emotional age is 8. Why do I choose right now to say 8? It's being in the sanctuary on Yom Kippur, going back for Mariv services, the last part of the service, with my father. My mother had already left to prepare the meal to break the fast. And my father wrapped his tallis, the talit, around me. And when my father wrapped his tallis around me, I felt that it's hard to even describe. It was an intense sense of connection, of being protected by love and God at the same time, because it was a tallis. It's a passage. My father was buried in his tallis. That's part of Judaism.